Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about pleating your Paji. Briefly, what I mean by that is adding the folds into your uniform pants. Now, they do not come with them, at least past like the thigh or something like that. But you will notice if you do take a look at your Paji, there are the folds in the waistband. So we're going to be using those to actually extend them all the way to the bottom of the pant. And there's going to be a few reasons why we do that. At least that's why I do that, and why the only two people that I know who actively go out of the way to do this, myself being obviously one of them. But there are going to be reasons why you do this for practical reasons as well. As an aside, you do not need to do this as a gumdosa. This is not something that we as a community have decided that's important. So unlike, and again this is where I'm going to put my cards on the table a little bit more, so unlike what kendo does, right? So kendo is very much about the appropriate dress, it's very much about like your presentation and maintaining those pleats. In fact, in that culture, like if you know someone who does not have those pleats, it's a little bit of a faux pas, right? But you might say like, well, now you're crossing too many boundaries, right? So like, you say you and only one other person do this, so therefore it cannot be canonical, right? So, I would normally agree with you if the other person was not in fact Grandmaster Kim. Now he always looks his best, right? So this might just be a way for him to, add an extra layer of just making sure everything is pristine and very, immaculate looking. But the fact that, of the people that I know who do this, one is, again, Grandmaster Kim, who is an headmaster of the entire, America, as well as a lot more. That says a lot, right? So I'm going to say, like, you don't need to do this. I highly recommend it. But if you're a student and you want to do it, ask your master first, just in case. That might add a little bit of friction that you don't want. But this is something that I highly recommend for not just now aesthetic reasons, because partially it is aesthetic because it looks nice, but also for some practical reasons. Admittedly, the practical reasons are a little bit more limited, but the main thing is, so first of all, it keeps the large quantity of pant kind of under control, right? So it also makes it less likely for you to trip because they are folded, right? So they're closer to your body, at least closer to the front of your body, so you're less likely to trip. At the very least, you're less likely to catch the underskirt of it and fall. But another thing is it also does mask your movement a little bit more, right? So if you have big billowing pants, you might think like, oh, you don't know where my knees are. You'd be surprised, right? Because if it's really flexible and it moves a lot, you can kind of generally see where the knees are. So if I do want to crack you in the knee with a strike, I might be able to. Versus if you do have those pleats, they do conceal things a little bit more. They're a little bit more uniform, literally. They're a little more uniform to look at, so it's harder for me to gauge what that person is doing, or even potentially the way they're facing, right? Now, obviously the toes will give that away, but this is something just to keep in mind because it's not merely an aesthetic thing, but also has some practicability. One word of caution though is that once you do this, at least for the pants that I use, so at least the houndstooth pants, if you do it once, they may not come out, right? So I was very lucky in the sense that when I did it, they kind of maintained their pleats, and it's kind of hard to get rid of them, which is good for me, right? Because I'm lazy and I don't like ironing stuff. But do keep that in mind. So be particularly careful if this is your first time like handling pleats. So I might recommend first is just like go through the first couple motions first before you actually put an iron to it, because that's going to make it a lot more permanent. I guess another thing to mention is that once you do this, you might want to learn how to properly fold and maintain the creases in your pants. That does not mean ironing them per se, but the main thing is like don't spaghetti, like crumple it all up and throw it in your duffel bag. You're going to want to learn how to fold it appropriately as you put it into your bag or in transport, anything like that. So it will take a little bit more effort after the fact, but just something to keep in mind. In this video, I'm going to be pleating pants that were gifted to me by Master Adler from Virginia. So also, just because we're talking about threads a little bit, and I want to support our martial artists, so you might notice I'm wearing a gumdo Gumdo shirt, and this was made by Master Crefo in New York. So if you want to take a look, give her a ring. Things that you'll need, obviously an iron with which to actually iron the pleats in. I would recommend using some pins because you don't want to eyeball that the entire time because it's probably not going to work out the way you want to. And also your Paji, right? So the pants that you want to pleat. So from this very unflattering view, right? Because I don't actually usually film myself ironing stuff. But yeah, so what you want to do, so this is obviously the front of the pants. We're not going to start with that, we're going to start with the back. And this is also going to be true when you eventually start folding your uniform. And again, just for full disclosure, this is something that I got from my kendo years. But if you notice actually while we're here, notice that there are these pleats, right? I know this is probably like the least helpful style of pant because this kind of stuff doesn't really show that well. But actually, if you do have the houndstooth pants, you're going to notice you can actually follow the lines of it a little bit more. But you might notice again you have these pleats, right? So there are already pleats inside the pant. Literally all we're going to do after we take care of the back is follow these all the way down and just iron them down, right? So what we'd like to do first is, so this is the front, right? Again, you can tell by the drawstring and all that fun stuff. So we're going to take a look at the back, right? So I'm going to just drag this along. Again, try to keep everything as centered as you can, right? So so just so you can see, so this flap, right? So at the very back should be more in line with the gap in the front. So we're not going to start with this top flap yet. We're actually going to go into this back one. So this is going to be behind your left leg. So find that flap, feel like the fold in it. Also just pinch it for now, right? So pinch it and kind of just follow it all the way down. Now unfortunately, so these pants are so big that eventually we'll have to probably hem them as well. But take this, right, and just again fall all the way to the back, right? So I'm going to slide this up so that this part will be out of screen. But you can hopefully still see some part of it. And just on the other end so you can see that, I'm just holding the very edge of the hem. So what I'm going to do is just follow it all the way to the back this way. Now if you have the houndstooth, you can actually tell if it's straight by following the pattern. So it's almost never going to be exactly straight the first time you do it because that's human nature. So actually this is not too bad if my eyes don't start to become cross-eyed. So at this point I would like to recommend that you do, when the slides up just a little bit more, use some pins, right? So these are dressmaker pins, so they're going to be very florid and pretty, but all I'm going to do is pin these suckers up probably this way, right, so that I don't stab myself when I eventually iron. And especially with this, more pins is fine, like it doesn't really matter. Like there's just going to be so many folds that you're going to want to maintain everything pretty happily. But again, this is going to be something that's going to be the back of your left pant. So I'm just gonna. I know these are very very pretty looking pins, but yeah. So what? So over here, bang, bang. I should probably learn how to fast forward this footage because otherwise you're literally going to be watching me this whole thing, or I can advertise it as, oh, whole thing, raw footage. That'd be great. But yeah, so now you can kind of notice again there's that full seam here. Again, you can feel it here, and notice that you can actually feel that fabric continue all the way down, and we're good. From there, I'm going to tuck that. So I'm going to pull you up a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. I'm going to tuck that, so not like behind. I'm going to tuck it into one of the, so that is the right pant. I'm going to put it right on top of it, right? So I'm not going to tuck it behind or anything like that. But while I do that, I'm going to come back up here so you can see. I'm going to try not to lose my pins. I'm going to also grab the back of your left pant, right pant, and I'm going to follow that crease down. Now ideally, these two are going to kind of like fold in on each other, right? So I'm going to feel up this. I'm going to follow it down, right? And again, I'm sliding back and forth just so you can stay on screen. You don't need to keep doing that. And I'm going to do a little bit of this. So notice how much fabric is actually going to gather, right? Again, if you have the hawk tooth, that actually makes things a lot easier. Ow. As you can tell, I'm not a professional seamstress or seamstress? Seam person, whatever it would be. Because I don't do that much. So notice now, that's fairly straight, right? And if I take a look, so if I peel this back, notice these will, hopefully not fall out, but these will overlap a lot. And if you kind of notice down here, I'll pull it up one more time, there's going to be a kind of a looping motion here. So it's not like one pant in front of the other, they're going to be looping. So at this point, I am going to add my fancy little pins. Things you never thought you'd do as a martial artist, that you find out you actually do quite a lot. Hemming and taking care of, sewing and stuff like that. This is particularly true if you have to maintain armor, which is something that you probably also did not think of when you picked up your armor. It's like, yes, with these skills, I'm going to learn to maintain pieces of plate onto my wrist gauntlet and stuff like that. But it's a good skill to learn. If only they actually taught this stuff in like home ec or something, which I admittedly didn't do. I didn't take that class. But this is a good skill for you to pick up regardless, and your spouse will probably like you all the more for it. So now notice we have these two pleats. Now this is a potentially dangerous part because I am going to do something maybe risky. We'll see. I'm going to try to just iron this out. So as we do that, make sure that the front for now, so the front of the Paji is flat against the bottom, right? So what I mean by that, there isn't like folding underneath, so everything's flat. So let's grab that iron and let's try to apply these pleats. So I'm going to be a little bit more rigorous than you need to be, just because I've done this once, and if I do mess up, I do have other pairs of pants. But this is something that I would like to get this started with. So what I'm going to do is actually start with the top layer and just go to town on that. And once I'm pretty happy with that, I'm going to go to the bottom layer. So let's cast judgment on these pants, right? So I'm going to slice up so it's mostly in camera. Again, you don't need to do that for yourself because that would be silly. But let's take a look, right? So I'm going to start with this, and I might make some people cringe by having the iron really close to the pin, right? And I'm going to go all in and assume that the left pant is also just as good. I'm going to do a little bit of that. I'm going to remove this pin because I don't actually know if those melt. I should probably have figured that out first. I'm just going to do a little bit of ironing, right? Then maybe once you're comfortable with that, you can maybe put it back in just in case you're not happy with it. But I'm looking at it and I'm liking how crisp it's looking. So all you're going to do is just keep going down, right? Potentially make some people freak out because you might be trying to melt some of the pins. But again, just remove, finish that crease. And I am completely and 100% aware that a lot of this is not going to show up on camera because of the very fabric I'm working on, because the Federation chose houndstooth for some reason. There's probably some reason for it that I just don't know. But it's not the easiest thing to kind of understand on camera, but we are going to try. Yeah. It's also kind of vaguely amusing that I'm talking to a camera and my dogs just don't care. Because I probably talk to myself so often that they're like, all right, like we got it. I know this is not nearly as interesting as like learning about the focuses or basics or anything like that, or eventually the applications. So I guess while I'm just kind of rambling away, and this is going to be my excuse for not speeding up the footage, I do intend to make videos on the applications of forms, but it's mostly limited by what we can do because of COVID. So once we're able to have more students in, I can have people that I trust to help film. we will get started on that because there's a lot of stuff that I would like to go through. Because there's going to be a lot of application that, again, shows that Gumdo is actually a really, really good martial art. Whoops. I'm assuming it's supposed to do that. It's a really, really good martial art for application, and it's just something that, unfortunately, we just don't do as an organization as much. So I want to kind of remedy that. So I know I made a few videos like the double thrust in Yeta 9, but I want to do a little more of that. This is going to be a very long video, isn't it? So you get to hear me ramble. That's what people like, right? Rambling madmen. Okay. Now, just for clarity, you might also notice that there are sort of these kind of pleats as well on the back. I'm assuming that's going to be all flat, just because that's again how Master Kim does it, and also how Kendo does it as well. So if you want to, you can go back through the other side as well. I think I did this solidly enough that the left pant is also pleated. If you want to, you can just go back through that just to make sure everything is happy, which I'm going to do just because, you know, I'm here already. I'm going to put you over here. So if you want to, you can iron the backside a little bit more, and then what we're going to do is we're going to flip it. Okay, so I'm probably going to cut all of this out. Alright, so let me just do one more of this. Yeah, I think everything is actually all set up. So now I'm going to go for this side. Okay, now at this point, if you want to remove these, you probably can. I believe that's all we really care about. But if you're unsure, as I vaguely am, you can actually probably keep them in if you want, if you have enough pins. Just make sure you don't stab yourself. So what we're going to do here is, so you might think, oh, I'm just going to flip it over, but be careful. This is also going to be something that we're going to do when we learn how to fold our uniform. But I'm actually going to maintain these folds, right? So I'm going to pinch it with my in this case my left hand, doesn't have to be my left. I'm going to pinch this, I'm going to flip it over. Normally I flip it myar, but because I want the big side over here, I'm actually going to flip it over here. Right, so I'm going to take it, hopefully the pins don't fall down, and I'm going to flip it over. Right, so again, make sure you keep this pinched because that's going to come undone in a hurry if you don't. So then we're going to come back up here. In fact, what I might do, and this is something that I'm going to recommend to you guys as well, is pin this whole thing together. I don't know if those were meant to go with that much friction, or not friction, whatever that is, but we're going to go with that. So actually maintain that for us. So now, what you can probably imagine is, now if you take a look at the front of your Paji, right, you have quite a few different of these different folds. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to take them more or less coming from the inside out, like flesh it out, right? So notice that we have this one here, we have this one right in front of the groin. I'll probably start with this one, follow it all the way out, add the pins, all that kind of stuff. So let's get started with that, right? So I'm going to take the centerpiece, and notice at this point you might be like, oh wait, that looks a little bit different from, you know, maybe that part of my pant, right? Right, so we do this, and if I follow it all the way down, we might notice that we might need to move some of these guys over if we need to. But there might be some difference, right? So again, remember the point of this is also to gather up the extra fabric. So if you need to, absolutely do that, right? So if you have it here, right, so that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to add my pins. yeah, this way, because why not? I went the other way before. Oop. So nothing new is going to be presented like this, right? So pretty much all you're going to do is you're going to take each of the flaps and go all the way down. I'm just going to keep this going just because if you're impatient you can just skip ahead, but if you get confused it's kind of hard to figure out what happened after someone, you know, thoroughly edited this video. So this will be a long video. It's just going to be it in the raw. And then just from there, just keep going, right? So you can have another pleat here that also looks like it's a little bit on the short side, but we're gonna gather that up a bit. All right. And there's probably someone who's more professional than I am, who's looking at me do this and they're like, what are you doing? Like that's not how you do it. But I am wholly understandably an amateur when it comes to ironing and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to do a do-de-do, right? Because that's what one does. Keep them this here. Do-de-do-de-do. It does help to have a quilter in the house because they have all these pins and a very nice iron that I personally do not need to acquire. Okay. Oh, that should be fine. We're going to keep on going. Right. So again, general theme, take the pleat, take it all the way down. Now there probably is a reason, and I should probably have researched this before I start filming, but there probably is a reason why there's a certain number of pleats in it, right? I believe there's at least a reason when I was in Kendo why they had these certain pleat, the pleat number specifically, right? But, you know, it is what it is. I guess this is also a good point to, or a good time also, just to mention, you know, like the different influences each of the Asian martial arts have had, most likely because if you're listening to this video, literally watching me take care of pants, you're probably more dedicated than the average, right? So like if we talk about just like what, so like I know there's a lot of like haughtiness when it turns into like, oh, well, my martial art has been around for, you know, X, Y, and Z years, or my martial art is of this, you know, ethnic origin, blah, blah, blah. We can probably fill in the blanks, we all know, because we've all probably experienced biases either, you know, probably against what we do. But all martial arts have been, you know, there's been influence between all these different martial arts for literally like the full extent of their existence, right? So for example, Kendo is not that old. Now it has origins, you know, that go all the way back, but so do pretty much any other martial art. Maybe except XMA. But actually what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to iron all of the right pant because everything is pleated, and then I'm going to deal with all the left. So hang in there while I continue to rant about here and that, this and that. Oh, you thought you were safe when you like, oh, I'm just going to watch this harmless video on ironing Paji. There's no way in hell that this person is going to start ranting about anything except Paji. Oh, you fools. You know, if I have a platform, there's gonna be something. There's gonna be something going on. Okay. I'm actually gonna be a little bit quiet while I'm doing this because I want to make sure I'm not doing anything silly. And again, this is something that you don't necessarily need to do, although if you're at this point, you're like, well, I'm already in it. I'm gonna iron it out. But this is something I think that does make your uniform look particularly much better, at least in my opinion. But yeah, so at least with regard to different martial arts, right? So obviously, like, this is something that I've taken more from Kendo specifically, right? So this is from partially my background. So that is, one thing. But again, there's always been interactions between all these different cultures, right? So like imperialism, right, is definitely part of it. But also just the way people interact, right? So ideas go here and there. So something that's truly Japanese or truly Korean could have originated pretty much anywhere. Well, anywhere in that general region. Okay, so that is all one pant. So let's take a look at the other, right? So I'm gonna do a little bit of this. Most likely that's gonna unfurl. That is in fact okay. So now let's take a look at the other side. I believe there are more pants or more pleats on the right hand side for some reason. So what we're gonna do, so again, if we have everything still in place from before, again this is the main seam. All we're gonna do is follow again from this seam now all the way down, right? And again, if you have the houndstooth, that makes it much easier to kind of follow it all the way down, right? This one feels a lot bigger, which means I probably did something silly, but let's take a look-see, right? So do, and we're gonna follow it up. So I guess while I'm again doing this, so again, if you're ever like harassed about like, oh, your martial art is only like so and so years old, or like, oh, it's like those ideas are actually from so and so. It's like, well, maybe, right? So for example, like Gumdo in itself is not the oldest martial art as itself, right? Because it was solidified and it was founded by President Jung Ho Kim, right? So obviously it didn't, like the organization didn't exist before then. But then there's a couple fallacies, right? Because I was a philosophy minor, almost major, to keep in mind, right? So the one thing that they're kind of, I guess it's not technically a fallacy, but whatever. But one thing that a lot of people who say that kind of misunderstand is like, just because something's new doesn't mean that it's bad. So just because I'm an American, right? So America's not that. I mean, it's actually concerning other countries as well. Like we're not like the oldest country, right? We're certainly on the newer side. Like especially if you compare yourselves to like England, and France, and a lot of fun stuff. And even then, like those countries aren't old per se. But then it's kind of like the same thing. Like, all right, so is America not a wonderful place to live in general because it's new-ish? It's like no, like it is what it is, right? Is America not as good as is not good because we have roots from other countries? No, right? It is exactly what it is. So again, just because something's new doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? I do feel like I did something silly on this, but we'll fix it up. Right, so we have our last pleat here. Right. And the biggest thing to acknowledge is like, yeah, like, so Kendo and Gumdo do share similarities, right? They have very similar, if not identical, swords, at least when we actively train. We have very similar backgrounds, right? So it's Korean versus Japanese sword styles, and obviously Korea and Japan exchanged ideas heavily. I'm not going to get into how because that might get into some tensions. But yeah, so like the ideas behind between Japan and Korea always fluctuate, right? So like things that we assume are very, very Japanese, for example, like ramen, was Chinese, right? And that's something that, again, as a man who is half Japanese, One thing that I do like about the Japanese is they take ideas, right, and they just make them their own, right? So in my opinion, they do make many ideas better, or I'm thinking specifically about like food, because I love Japanese food. Because if you ever had Japanese pizza, that stuff is like one of the best things I've ever had. Japanese coffee is also very good. And so it's like, just because, you know, like, I was going somewhere with that. It's okay. So also, I'm ironing the pleats. Again, there's nothing particularly fancy we're doing here just yet. Again, after this, I'm going to show you how to properly fold your uniform as well, right? So you can maintain those pleats. Yeah, so the one thing to keep in mind as a martial artist is like every martial art does something a little bit differently. Even within the martial art, people do things differently. Like, take a look at the weird crap that I do in my school versus a lot more traditional martial arts places where they do a lot more emphasis on like meditation and stuff like that, which is honestly not something that I do as much with my students, although I know I should, right? So like, just saying like, oh, like you're taking this from so-and-so, it's like, well, yes and no, right? Alright, so at this point, you've ironed everything, so you can probably get rid of all of the pins, the overabundance of pins, and then I'll start to show you how to fold this, right? So I could honestly just cut this from the video. We're having a nice chat, right? So yeah, so especially if you are, you know, a master or an instructor, or even if you're not, take everything that you hear with a grain of salt, right? So that, like, obviously consider the source, right? So obviously if you are, you know, Gumdosa, and Master Kim, or Master Kim, or President Kim, or anyone like that says something to you, 100% listen, right? But then, like, keep in mind what, again, the agendas of other people are. So for example, like what was my agenda, like in general, I like to see Gumdosa get better, right? Mostly so we can be a little bit more center stage with a lot of stuff, right? Because Gumdo is actually a very, very good martial art that doesn't get that much credence, right? So I'm kind of making these videos for us to have a more unified approach and a better understanding of swordsmanship in general. But then you might hear, again, like other people, like, oh, like you're doing so-and-so because of so-and-so, or such and such. And it's like, yeah, maybe, right? But then, like, do you know the person? Do you trust the person's opinion? There's a lot of things that go into taking criticisms, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to flip it, right? I should probably do it this way. Actually, I can do it this way because... Whoop. Not exactly what I meant to do. We're just going to remove all of these guys. So already, if you followed along, you will notice that you have very permanent looking pleats. So if we take a look, just make sure you don't forget any, especially near your bum, because you don't want to be sitting on these. Yeah, so if you did do this carefully, and again, if this is your first time doing this, and these are like your only pants, be very, very careful, right? But if you did follow along this journey, and I am assuming there's all of like maybe 4 people who would even at least just watch this, let alone do this to their own pants. So yeah, so take a look. So this is after you can kind of just see the general creases, whatever, just on the board, right? So this is not the end product, right? But this is what we're going to be going with, right? So from here, I'm going to show you how to fold this. I'm going to probably make a different video for people, even if they don't have these creases. It's something that they can also do. So this is what I recommend every time that you practice, right, is learning how to fold this as you get going. So what we're going to do, just like what we did in terms of our ironing, we're actually going to start with the back end, right, and we're just going to gently lay it down, right. Then from here, what you're going to do is going to kneel, and you're going to, again, feel up the creases. Again, so notice again, we have this very nice folding motion here. I'm going to straighten everything out. And once everything is pinched together, right, I'm going to grab it, I'm going to flip it over. I usually just do it this way, just because, you know, but I also want to make sure we're in camera. Make sure that, again, this is all pinched, leave it there, and now I'm going to kind of kneel. I usually do this the other way. I'm usually on the other side, but we're going to do it this way. So then from here, all you're going to do is flatten out the pleats, right? So flatten them out. Do. And ideally, you're going to have a little bit more of a shape to the sides as well. Now, just because this is a drawstring, as opposed to, again, with the hakama, which is all one single plate, it's not going to be perfect, right? Now, again, if you want to, you can try to make it a little more shapely, right? But again, that's just the nature of having a drawstring, which is super convenient, right? So it's going to look something vaguely like this, right? So notice, again, all the pleats are going straight down, right? So then what I like to do from here is kind of like fold in the wings, right? So fold this in, only so that's a there we go, straight line this way, right? Straight line this way. I'm going to fold it about of a third of the way, right? I'm usually again on the other side. I'm going to fold it in, and then that was not thirds, but we're going to fold it in one more time. Now, ideally, the back pleat is still the same. You probably can't tell anything based on the camera, but this is at least something that can maintain your pleats. And with that, we just learned how to pleat our pants, right? So again, I would recommend going through the first couple motions first. Now this is obviously at the end of the video, so hopefully if you were going to do this, you're going to watch the whole thing, come back to it. Probably didn't, but you're going to do this anyway. So I would recommend, if you're uncomfortable about like actually setting things in stone, so to speak, just go through the first couple motions, right? So get used to, again, feeling out the folds, right? Especially if you do have the houndstooth, which is going to be very obvious if it's not on the fold, or on like along the axis of the houndstooth. So just keep that in mind, right? But I know I didn't quite rant per se, but we had a little bit of a chat, right? So if you have any questions, I guess comment. That sounds really YouTube-y. I want to get into that weird zone. If you have any questions, let me know. As usual, stay humble, stay safe, and keep training. Haidong, and keep looking good.